Welcome to my channel, Alzura.
A Canadian once called their Australian co-worker really intense because she told him directly that his idea wouldn't work. The Australian thought the Canadian was being weirdly passive for never saying what he actually thought. They were both right, and they were both confused because they'd been sold the same brochure. Friendly country, English speaking, laid back, immigration friendly, outdoors culture, cold beer. What nobody told either of them is that those words mean completely different things depending on which hemisphere you land in. This video is about the specific places where Australia and Canada stop being cousins and start being a fascinating case study in two countries that built themselves out of similar raw materials and somehow arrived somewhere very different. We are going into politeness, housing, work culture, nature, healthcare, national identity, and the immigration experience itself. Let's go. Start with the thing that catches everyone off guard first. Both countries are internationally known for being nice, and both countries are right to claim it, but they have radically different software running underneath that reputation. In Canada, politeness means softening. You don't say that won't work. You say that's a really interesting direction. I just want to flag a few things we might want to think about. You frame disagreement as curiosity. You preface criticism with praise. You apologize before saying something that doesn't actually require an apology. Sorry, could I just... Yeah, sorry, could I grab that? That's a real sentence Canadian people say. To a napkin dispenser. Australia's politeness is different. It's about directness without malice. You can tell someone their idea is bad, and that's not rude, that's respect. What's rude in Australia is being fake. Performing enthusiasm you don't feel. Smiling through something that's clearly not working. The phrase "she'll be right" isn't optimism. It's a social contract. Stop making this bigger than it is. Move on. We are fine. When those two styles collide, and they do constantly, in workplaces and sharehouses and friendships, the result is a slow-motion miscommunication where the Canadian thinks the Australian is being aggressive, and the Australian thinks the Canadian is being slippery. Neither person is being rude. They are just running different definitions of what honesty looks like in social clothing. The thing that makes this interesting isn't the difference itself. It's that both countries believe they are the more emotionally intelligent one. Now let's talk about space, because it shapes everything else. Both Australia and Canada are enormous countries with most of their population jammed into a handful of cities along the edges. But the cities feel completely different to navigate, afford, and exist in. Toronto is a dense, transit-connected, walkable for North America kind of city. It has a subway. It has neighborhoods that blur into each other. You can go from dinner to a bar to a late-night spot without needing to think about a car. For a Canadian city, that's genuinely impressive. Sydney is also dense in its inner ring, but then it just keeps going, and going, and going. The outer suburbs of Sydney aren't suburbs in the European sense. They are practically separate towns that got absorbed without anyone updating the road infrastructure. The train system exists, but it's designed more as a, well, we have one than as a, please use this. Driving in Sydney is a default, not the backup plan. Melbourne is often considered more walkable and grid-friendly than Sydney, which is true, but Melbourne is also where people routinely commute 90 minutes each way and call that manageable. The Canadian equivalent will be something like Toronto's outer suburbs, Brampton, Mississauga, where the car is non-negotiable and the infrastructure hasn't caught up. The difference is that Canadians often know those areas feel like car-dependent compromise. In Australian cities, that spatial sprawl tends to get rebranded as lifestyle. It's not worse. It's just a different relationship with what living in a city actually means. Here's where the two countries converge on the same bad news, but in different shapes. Both Sydney and Vancouver consistently appear in the top 5 least affordable housing markets in the entire world. Not expensive for their region. Not pricey relative to local wages. Top 5 globally. The kind of unaffordability that makes people from Hong Kong and London raise their eyebrows. But the texture of the crisis is different. In Canada, the homeownership dream is still culturally active. It's still what you're supposed to be working toward. The detached house with a yard is still the finish line even when it's $1.4 million in 40 minutes from anything. There's a grief to Canadian housing, a sense of something being lost, a generation that was promised something the math no longer supports. In Australia, the grief exists too, but there's more of a shrug laid on top of it. Renting for life is becoming culturally normalized faster. The property investment culture, the investment property culture, is more openly acknowledged. Australians are more likely to have a parent or aunt who owns multiple investment properties and talks about it at Christmas, which creates a different kind of social tension. Not just, I can't afford a house. More like, someone I know is the reason I can't afford a house, and I'm going to have to talk to them at Christmas. Neither situation is good. One is quieter about it. Both countries have a reputation for flat workplaces. No rigid hierarchy. First names everywhere. The boss is Dave, not Mr. Kowalski. That's real, but the flatness operates differently. In Canada, the flat workplace is about language. The org chart might still exist and function exactly like a hierarchy, but everyone performs informality. You call your boss Dave. Dave calls you by your first name. Dave also controls your performance review, your salary band, and your ability to get promoted. But we are all going to pretend we are just people here, having a conversation. In Australia, the flatness is more about behavior. The actual cultural crime isn't calling someone by their title. It's acting like you're better than people. This is a concept Australians sometimes call tall poppy syndrome. And it's real. In Australia, visibly trying to elevate yourself above your peers creates social friction. It's not the system that's flat. It's the expectation that no individual should float above the group. What that means in practice: Australians in professional settings often understate their credentials. They don't walk in and lead with their CV. They work to seem like they are not trying that hard, even when they very much are. Canadians can sometimes read this as laziness or low ambition. Australians often read Canadian professional self-promotion as exhausting. Both groups are wrong about the other, but both groups will keep thinking they are right for a while. Both countries are social around food and drink, but the texture is completely different. In Australia, the pub is a load-bearing social institution. The Friday Arvo session, afternoon drinks after work, is not optional socializing. It's how you establish that you're a real part of the team. It's where information gets shared. It's where alliances get built. The pub is loud, direct, a little chaotic, and specifically designed to flatten the hierarchy we just talked about. Your boss is buying around. You're buying around. That is a contract. In Canada, particularly English Canada, the equivalent is a patio, but the patio has a different emotional register. It's softer, more planned. You text 3 weeks ahead. You make a reservation. You arrive in a group that's slightly too large for the table. You eat a lot of brunch. The socializing is warm, but it's also more curated. This isn't a knock on either. It's just that the Australian model tends to create faster, noisier friendships. The Canadian model tends to create friendships that feel more considered and more planned, which some people find more sustainable and some people find lonely. If you're someone who makes friends fast and then maintains them effortlessly, you'll probably feel more naturally at home in an Australian social environment. If you're someone who builds slowly and keeps people for life, Canada might actually fit better. Both countries have a huge nature identity. The wilderness, the outdoors, the landscape is part of who they are. But the emotional relationship is different. Canada romanticizes nature. The lakes, the mountains, the snow, the quiet. These are genuinely central to the Canadian self-image. Canadians go camping as a kind of spiritual recalibration. The cottage is where the real Canada lives. There is something almost reverent about how Canadians talk about the land. Australians are also outdoor people, but they're outdoor people in the way that you're outdoor people when the outdoors constantly tries to kill you and you've just gotten used to it. The relationship is more resigned, more adversarial, more affectionate in a frustrated way. Yeah, it's 38 degrees and there's probably a snake somewhere. Are we going to the beach or not? What this produces is a different emotional texture in how each country talks about the environment. Canadians talk about nature with loss and tenderness. There's anxiety about what's being destroyed. Australians talk about it with dark humor and a kind of defiant pride. The bushfires were awful. They are also deeply, weirdly part of the Australian story, in a way that's hard to explain to someone from outside. Here's the one that always flips assumptions. Australia has the reputation for deadly wildlife. The spiders, the snakes, the jellyfish, the saltwater crocodiles, the blue-ringed octopus, which is the size of a golf ball and can kill you, and you might not even feel it bite you. The reputation is global and terrifying. Canada's danger is cold. Winters that drop to -30 and make your car refuse to start, and your face hurt within 30 seconds of being outside. Blizzards that are considered unremarkable. Ice storms that take out power grids. Here's the actual situation. Statistically, very few people die from Australian wildlife. The snake bite fatality rate is genuinely low. The spider deaths are close to 0 per year. The danger is real but heavily concentrated in specific regions and situations that most urban Australians never encounter. The Canadian cold, meanwhile, kills people every single winter. Exposure, car accidents on ice, elderly people who can't keep their homes warm. It's not dramatic. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't get a travel advisory, but it's consistent. What both countries have in common is that neither will fully acknowledge their actual risks, because both risks are too woven into the national identity to be treated as simply dangerous. The Australian spider is a punchline and a point of pride. The Canadian winter is something you endure as proof of character. Both are fine once you've lived there for a year. Both will surprise you before that. Both countries have universal public health care. Both countries' healthcare systems are under significant pressure right now. But the pressure looks different. In Australia, the main frustration for most people is bulk billing, the system where GPS can bill Medicare directly so the patient pays nothing. In 2024, bulk billing rates dropped significantly, especially in cities. Many Australians are now paying out of pocket for GP visits that used to be free, and the gap between the Medicare rebate and the actual cost is growing. Mental health access through the public system is limited and waiting times are long. In Canada, the core crisis is GP access. In several provinces, finding a family doctor who's taking new patients is genuinely difficult, sometimes requiring months on wait lists. Some Canadians have no family doctor at all and rely on walk-in clinics. Ontario and British Columbia have been facing this crisis for years, and it's getting more pronounced. The shared experience, both countries give you the reassurance of you won't get a devastating medical bill, and both countries make you wait. The wait in Australia is more about cost creep. The wait in Canada is more about access. Neither is what the brochure promised. Both are still meaningfully better than having no coverage at all. This one is subtle, but it explains a lot. Australians know who they are, or at least they have a very clear story about who they are. Irreverent, direct, anti-authoritarian, outdoorsy, not trying to impress anyone. That story is sometimes too simple and sometimes used to deflect harder conversations about Indigenous history, racism, and class. But the story is present. It's confident. Australians don't need to compare themselves to another country to define themselves. Canadians define themselves significantly in relation to America. We are not like that is a genuine, recurring pillar of Canadian identity, which is understandable. You share the longest border in the world with the loudest country in the world, and the cultural gravity is immense. But it creates a national self-image that's partly constructed in the negative. Not this, not that, more apologetic, more careful, more anxious about being perceived a certain way internationally. The result is that Canadians are often more internationally aware and more globally empathetic. They had to be thoughtful about identity because identity isn't automatic. Australians are often more self-assured and less interested in how they are perceived globally, because the Pacific Ocean has done a lot of the insulation work for them. Neither is obviously better. One produces more confidence. The other sometimes produces more nuance. Both countries are among the most migration-friendly destinations in the world, and both are genuinely multicultural in real, visible ways. Toronto is consistently ranked among the most diverse cities on Earth by birthplace. Melbourne and Sydney are close behind. The demographics of both countries have changed dramatically in the last 30 years, and both have largely absorbed that change without the social fractures you see in parts of Europe. But the integration style is different. Canada has an official multiculturalism policy, a deliberate, articulated national position that cultural identity should be preserved, not assimilated. The mosaic metaphor. You can be Canadian and keep your language, your food, your traditions. The container stretches to include you. Australia's approach is more pragmatic and less ideologically articulated. It's not that Australia is less multicultural. In some cities, it's more so. It's that the model is less formal. The expectation is more social, less political. You'll be included, but the social entry point is often through shared work, shared sport, shared humor. The cultural mix happens through contact rather than through official architecture. For migrants, this can feel like the difference between a country that's philosophically committed to your belonging and a country that's practically comfortable with your presence. Both produce genuine communities. The root there is just different. So here's where that leaves you. Two countries that sell a similar story, English-speaking, immigrant-friendly, high quality of life, massive landscapes, casual culture. And underneath that story, different definitions of politeness, different relationships with space, different housing crises, different work social contracts, different ways of being outdoors, different things that actually kill you, different pressures on the same public health promise, and different answers to the question, who are we? Neither is better. Both are real. Both are worth knowing before you move there, visit there, date someone from there, or work alongside someone from there. Here's what I want to know from you. Which one of these differences would actually change your daily life the most? Not the biggest difference on paper, the one that would hit hardest at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday when you're tired and just trying to exist. The politeness thing? The housing thing? The way friendships form? Drop it in the comments because I'm genuinely curious whether Australians and Canadians watching this recognize themselves in it, or think I've got it completely wrong.